a young Marxist student leader from Pakistan, Tariq Ali, becomes the scourge of the British establishment when he leads anti-Vietnam War protests outside the American embassy in London.
We are here to express our solidarity with the guerrillas of the National Liberation Front.
The violence shocks Britain and the world. Ali's militant activism is inspired partly by someone once dubbed the angriest man in America.
I have more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil.
Malcolm X is a radical black rights activist based in New York who says America is institutionally racist.
We intend to fire our people up so much until if they can't have their equal share in the house, they'll burn it down.
Tariq and Malcolm meet and become friends in December 1964 when the American speaks at a controversial debate at Oxford University.
On seeing the audience, he whispered in my ear, "I've never spoken to such a large group of well-dressed whites before."
I live in a society whose social system is based upon the castration of the black man, whose political system is based on castration of the black man, and whose economy is based upon the castration of the black man.
He was a dangerous figure now. His intelligence and his power of speech frightened many of his opponents, black and white.
55 years on, Tariq Ali, now a UK citizen, retraces Malcolm X's very British odyssey.
He just looked away, like, don't come up and say hello, and for God's sake, don't say you spent the afternoon in my bedroom.
Revealing what really went on and examining how Malcolm's legacy still resonates in Britain today.
Two thoughts went through my head at the same time. Either this guy's a hustler, or he's a very great man indeed.
Tariq Ali begins his life of protest and dissent in the late 50s, while still a teenager at school in Pakistan.
I read in the newspaper that a black American called Jimmy Wilson had been sentenced to death for stealing a $1. So we got about 10 or 12 school students together and said, come what may, we've got to show some support for Jimmy Wilson, and marched straight to the US consul's office in Lahore. People were shocked when we came back and told them it made the news that we had done this.
Tariq's and other public protests result in a stay of execution for Wilson, and his reputation as a street fighter begins, much to the horror of the military dictatorship in Pakistan.
I was banned from public speaking and threatened with expulsion from the city. My uncle in military intelligence came to my parents and said, this is getting too much, the file on this boy is too big, get him out of the country, anything could happen. So my parents just said, you should go and study abroad now. And I was very reluctant to leave my friends. But, finally I did it and landed up in Exeter College, Oxford.
Oxford is a revelation, but it doesn't blunt the Marxist desire for dissent.
There was another demonstration in Oxford because the South African ambassador was visiting, and we said, no way. The Conservative Club had invited him, and we said, look at what's going on in South Africa.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Eric Abrahams, who's very active in the union with myself and others, said we're going to stop this. And we pelted the South African ambassador's car with eggs, a few stones, and there were pictures of him sort of cowering, and we said, out, we don't want you here. After this event, which made the national news, I think there were about 8 or 9 of us identified as ringleaders, including Eric Abrahams and myself. Eric was a Jamaican. I was from Pakistan. So they blamed it onto us, naturally, the troublemakers, foreigners stoking up nice, young English kids. And we were expelled for 6 weeks from Oxford.
When they return, Ali and Abrahams stoke up even more controversy when they organise a debate at the Oxford Union. The subject is extremism. The BBC televises it.
Well, that then is what they're debating tonight in the Oxford Union. Extremism in the defence of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
Their star is not yet well known to the British public.
Now, the next speaker in favour of this thesis, Malcolm X. Just before we join his speech again, this is one of the most mysterious and unusual figures probably ever to have come to the Oxford Union. Let's just for a moment see what we can find out about this man.
Malcolm has been through several incarnations prior to meeting Tariq.
You've got to keep in mind that he's been described as the angriest man in America. His origins, as he describes them in his autobiography, are spectacular and frightening. While his mother was carrying him in 1925, he insists that she was harassed by the Ku Klux Klan and every window in their house was broken. Half his relatives, he claims, were destroyed in white violence. He himself turned to a life of crime, as he admits, and dope addiction and so on, and then suddenly discovered what he calls the new natural religion for the black man.
Now a Muslim, Malcolm rises to become spokesman for the Nation of Islam and soon makes a name for himself.
The black Muslim movement of Malcolm X is sometimes put forth as the dangerous alternative to all of the nonviolent activist groups symbolized by Dr. Martin Luther King. It has been suggested also that this movement preaches the gospel of violence.
No, the black people in this country have been the victims of violence at the hands of the white man for 400 years. And following the ignorant Negro preachers, we have thought that it was godlike to turn the other cheek to the brute that was brutalizing us.
Malcolm's uncompromising stance puts him at odds with America's non-violent civil rights movement.
The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who had brutalized them for 400 years.
There was a division between 2 wings of the black movement in the United States. There was the nonviolent movement led by Martin Luther King, and Malcolm was the more vigorous movement which believed in the right of black people to defend themselves if under attack.
With Malcolm as its chief advocate, Nation of Islam membership in America grows rapidly, from 5,000 to 40,000. He also starts to make unwelcome international news. In December 1963, when President Kennedy is killed in Dallas, Malcolm defies an order from the Nation of Islam's leader to say nothing.
What did you say, Malcolm? Well, I said the same thing that everybody says, that his assassination was the result of the climate of hate. But only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing. But you did not say that you were glad the president was killed. No, that's what the press said.
The chickens are coming home to roost quote, we thought was very daring. And, we said, wow, someone's actually said that, because he was the only critical voice.
But the nation's spiritual leader, Elijah Muhammad, punishes Malcolm X by barring him from speaking to the media for 90 days. 2 months later, Malcolm announces he's leaving the organization.
Why did you fall out with Elijah Muhammad?
Well, some internal disagreements and differences that I would rather not go into, but I think that they will come out in public before long.
The differences include allegations that Muhammad has fathered several children with his teenage secretaries, making Malcolm an even greater threat to his former boss.
Elijah Muhammad has given the order to his followers to see that I am crippled or killed.
Malcolm also faces a threat from the FBI, who have him under surveillance. In Britain, Tariq Ali is being watched too, by MI5. In December 1964, their paths cross.
The Oxford Union, one of the most famous debating societies in the world. And on his feet at this moment, Malcolm X, one of the leaders of the black Muslims in America. Let's, for a moment, just hear a little of what he's saying.
You make my point. That as long as a white man does it, it's all right. A black man is supposed to have no feelings.
And a brief but fierce friendship results.
Malcolm knew they'd kill him. He said, either the FBI or the Nation of Islam or a combination of both, because I am now too dangerous for them.
When Malcolm X arrives in Oxford in December 1964 to participate in the university debate on extremism, Tariq Ali has no idea the man he's about to meet is facing almost certain death. Malcolm is totally relaxed.
At one of the debates, usually there were 8 debates, a Union photograph was taken to mark the occasion. And here is the famous one taken in Michaelmas term 1964, when Malcolm came to speak at the Union. Here's Malcolm, the heart of it. Here is Humphrey Berkeley, the Conservative Member of Parliament who debated him in the famous debate. Here is Eric Abrahams, who was elected President of the Union.
We are asked to say to despots, who traditionally always use force, that we are prepared to be just as extreme in our assertion of liberty.
It was Eric Abrahams' idea. He said to me privately, should we invite him? I said, definitely, why not? Let's have a debate. Malcolm accepted. We couldn't believe our luck. Then we said, how are we going to pay the fare? Someone approached the BBC and said, will you help cover Malcolm X's fare? And they said, only if we can film the debate. So he said, oh, fine, okay. Film it then. Barry Goldwater, the Republican nominee for president, had just come out with the slogan saying,
extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue.
So we said, let's turn it around. This is a right-wing Republican that said that. Let's get Malcolm to see if he'll propose the motion. So it was a very clever idea, very dialectical in a way.
The event takes place in a chamber built especially for student debates.
Oxford and Cambridge were created as debating chambers, essentially to prepare elite students for ruling the country. So they were modelled on the House of Commons.
This historic setting provides the backdrop for the first meeting between Tariq and Malcolm.
I was dressed in formal dress from Pakistan. Malcolm saw me from a distance and immediately came up, and Eric introduced him. And he gave me a hug and he said, Muslim brother, nice to meet you. So I said, Malcolm, it's great to meet you. But I just want to tell you, I am born a Muslim, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. In fact, I'm an atheist. And he burst out laughing and said, I've just been traveling in the Muslim world in different parts of it, and I've met many people like you, so I'm not as surprised as you think. He was very educative and nice, in terms of replying to questions or telling me things or asking me lots of questions, which he did, about the state of the world and Pakistan and this, that, and the other. So I did like him a lot. There was something about him which was very compelling and hypnotic, really.
Malcolm's travels outside America create a desire to hear different points of view.
Eric Abrams invited some of us to meet Malcolm X the morning before the debate. And so I just got into a debate with him. And to me, he was just a fellow human being. But I found most of the people sitting around the table hardly open their mouths. And I don't think they'd even had a conversation with a non-white person. It was because the number of black students was very small.
Judith Oakley is now part of the Oxford University establishment. In '64, she's a radical student, the first woman to become a member of the Oxford Union. Malcolm arranges a second meeting at his hotel via an intermediary who says, bring a friend.
He said, Malcolm X wants to meet you. And of course, retrospectively, you can see that he wouldn't want to take any risks of being alone with a white woman or whatever. And this friend, Chloe Stalibras, was in. So Chloe and I went to the Randolph, and the porter or somebody took us upstairs to his rooms.
This is the first time Professor Oakley has spoken on television about her hotel meeting with Malcolm X.
We didn't come armed with questions. We weren't journalists. We weren't groupies. He was finding out about us. He must have got a lovely inside view of two women who were on the left and were completely at ease in his company. But I don't think we asked him a single question.
As they listen, the young women also get a glimpse of what life is like for one of the most famous black men in America.
Malcolm said to Chloe and me, would you go into the bathroom when the waiter comes? There was this fear of, who knows, a photographer coming up with the waiter and then taking a photograph of Malcolm with two white women in his bedroom, because that was all there was. There wasn't a separate lounge at all. And he was obviously very much on the defensive. And we just went into the bathroom sort of giggling, but we didn't contest it at all. But you can see now that he was quite rightly fearful.
Like Tariq Ali and most other people in Britain, Judith Oakley is unaware of the pressure Malcolm is under.
People imagine retrospectively that we all knew who Malcolm X was, but without this sort of global television, people didn't really know.
I'm sure that I've read that they believed that the black people should be given areas in the United States in which they should be the dominant be the only race.
He doesn't apparently follow that through. I've looked rather carefully at his own autobiographical account, and there's no evidence that he advocates that.
In fact, Malcolm is advocating a whole new ideology by the time he arrives in Oxford. Since splitting from the Nation of Islam, he's founded 2 new Black Power organisations.
Dissatisfied with the policy of the black Muslims, he's now the leader of his own independent group, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated.
Number one, there are 2 groups of us now. That is, those who broke away have formed into 2 groups. One which is religious and based upon the orthodox Islamic teaching, and the other is non-religious. And the name of it is the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And we want to be recognized and respected as human beings. And we have a motto which tells somewhat how we intend to bring it about. Our motto is, by any means necessary.
Malcolm is also on an extended voyage of discovery. His first visit to Britain is part of a world tour that takes in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It gives him a changed global view.
In April, I was fortunate to make the Hajj to Mecca and went back again in September to try and carry out my religious requirements. But at the same time that I believe in that religion, I have to point out I'm also an American Negro.
You get to see that from all of his notes, because
Hungarian-born British historian Marika Sherwood is the author of a book that analyses the importance of Malcolm X's foreign travels.
He calls them travel diaries. Notes down every person he meets, every place he goes, because he was meeting so many people and seeing so many new things. And as he kept saying, he needed time to think everything through.
The important thing one gets from your book and other books and documents and essays is that Malcolm's travels played a huge part in turning him away from a very narrow view of black nationalism. And he says, I was reading it, in December '64, Malcolm writes, "It's a change I've undergone and am still undergoing." He had met lots of new people in Africa, in the Arab worlds, and all of them told him one thing: anyone can be a Muslim. But for Malcolm, it came as a sort of thunderbolt.
What he found on the Hajj was that there were Muslims on the Hajj who were white-skinned. And the Muslim theologians, if he ever questioned them about this, would of course have told him that anyone can become a Muslim. It's a faith, it's a belief. It can become a way of life, but it's not about racism. And given where he came from, this would have been absolutely enormous.
Malcolm's first trip outside America is an eye-opening 5 months, taken in 19 different countries, many of which are black nations that have recently gained independence from white rule.
For the first time, the voice of the new Africa is being heard in the UN. This voice, speaking of the rights of man, has been listened to with great respect by the world leaders. The new African states form a powerful bloc in the Cold War. Voting together, they can sway the issue in the United Nations.
Malcolm X hopes to harness this new black African unity in his fight for the rights of African Americans.
Malcolm became what I suppose we would call a Pan-Africanist, and he realized that he could get support regarding the situation of African Americans from the new Organization of African Unity, which he asked for. He asked them to take up the issue of how African Americans were being treated at the United Nations.
Our enemies are many. They tell us that this particular person or that particular country has greater or more favorable potentialities than the other. They do not tell us that we should unite, that we are all as good as we are able to make ourselves once we are free.
In Britain, Malcolm's reputation is still that of an agent provocateur who preaches violence. But in reality, his philosophy is radically changing. So as the Oxford debate gets underway, no one really knows what he is going to do or say.
One of the reasons that I'm in no way reluctant or hesitant to do whatever is necessary to see that black people do something to protect themselves, I honestly believe that the day that they do, there will be more whites on their side than are now on their side with these little wishy-washy love thy enemy approach that they've been using up to now. And if I'm wrong, then you are racialists.
It's been 55 years since Tariq Ali sat with Malcolm X in the Oxford Union debating chamber. It's the same today as it was then.
So this is where I think I was seated on that day. The speech he made at the Oxford Union was one of his last big speeches. Of course, he spoke elsewhere, but this became a standard point of reference because what he said at this debate, which was crucially important, was that he was in favor of black and whites uniting to fight against racism. He had never said that before.
And a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone. Don't care what color you are.
In a strange sort of way, he was almost signing his death warrant.
The Oxford Union debate starring Malcolm X is groundbreaking. Not only is it the first time a black American radical has been invited to speak, but the BBC takes the unusual step of reporting from the debate live. In 2019, Tariq Ali is back in Oxford to relive the occasion by watching it on a big screen for the first time.
Now, the next speaker against extremism was one of the younger Conservative MPs, Humphrey Barclay, the member for Lancaster. He's a very independent member, something of a thorn in the flesh of the Conservative whips.
Mr. X enunciates policies that his countrymen understand only too well. He is North America's leading exponent of apartheid.
Shocking.
Liberty to him means racial segregation.
this was a very live subject at the time because some of us had been expelled from Oxford for several weeks for opposing the presence of the South African ambassador. So the fact that Berkeley actually said this to Malcolm struck me as very provocative, and I was looking to see whether he was going to react, which he didn't. I just thought he was very cool.
And now, Mr. President, if I may, I must come to your own somewhat peculiar role in this debate. Because you, sir, plainly, are a person who is not given to extremism. Ask the proctors.
These jokes Humphrey Berkeley is making were very typical of the Union. And Eric had started off his speech saying that he had two Muslims on his side. One was Malcolm X, a black Muslim, and the other was Tariq a red Muslim, which had created a lot of laughter as well.
As Malcolm prepares to respond, everyone expects the black nationalist rhetoric they've seen and heard before.
I must say my impression is that his Malcolm X and the black Muslim sect, of which he is one of the leaders, that their policy, either their beliefs or the end product of their beliefs, would in fact be the supremacy of the black race.
He denies this, saying he doesn't believe either in segregation or the domination by the blacks. He himself has broken with the black Muslim organization and started his new mosque in America, and he says of it, and this is it doesn't sound a very violent program, it will be the working base for an action program designed to eliminate the political oppression, the economic exploitation, and the social degradation suffered daily by 22 million Afro-Americans. He says we don't want violence, but every Negro should carry a gun in his house, have a gun in his house, as he has a right to do under the American Constitution.
On seeing the audience, he whispered in my ear, "I've never spoken to such a large group of well-dressed whites before." Slightly apprehensive would be the word, but that disappeared very quickly.
Malcolm wastes little time in demolishing America's version of racial democracy.
I'm speaking as a black man from America, which is a racist society. No matter how much you hear it talk about democracy, it's as racist as South Africa or as racist as Portugal. The only difference between it and South Africa preaches separation and practices separation. America preaches integration and practices segregation. I have more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil.
He had been vilified by some of the tabloids. Some people objected after the BBC filmed this, attacking them for having shown it. But by and large, the audience, I remember, that night of young people, largely white, was hypnotized by Malcolm. They had never heard these things being said before. For many of them, it was a first. And the faces, when you focus on them, are young faces filled with hope.
So my contention is that whenever a people come to the conclusion that the government which they have supported proves itself unwilling or proves itself unable to protect our lives and protect our property because we have the wrong color skin, we are not human beings unless we ourselves band together and do whatever, however, whenever is necessary to see that our lives and our property is protected.
Stand up, fight back, message which Malcolm made so much part of his oratory and his politics, but which was then later on taken up by singers, rap artists.
I don't believe in any form of unjustified extremism, but I believe that when a man is exercising extremism, a human being is exercising extremism in defense of liberty for human beings, it's no vice. And when one is moderate in the pursuit of justice for human beings, I say he's a sinner. Old Patrick Henry said liberty or death. That's extreme. Very extreme.
Was never a speaker quite like Malcolm, with his authority, with who he was, with his views, who addressed the Union while I was in Oxford.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
I remember very well at the end of the debate where he got a standing ovation. He came and sat down next to me and whispered in my ear, "Was that all right? Are you sure?" I said, "Just look at them."
The final climax of his speech was so outstanding. It was absolutely unusual to have that overwhelming applause.
In the end, though, it's declared that Malcolm's side has lost the motion. But for Tariq Ali, there is only one winner.
Somehow it didn't seem to matter, because it was such an important event that everyone felt, that what they were listening to was something quite remarkable, which they'd never heard before and they might never hear again. Afterwards, I walked him back to his hotel and we chatted. And I stood up to say goodbye. And I said, it's been great meeting you. I really hope to see you again. And he said, "I don't think it'll be possible." So I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, they're going to kill me. So I don't know whether we will meet again." I was stunned. And two simultaneous thoughts went through my head at the same time. Either this guy's a hustler, or he's a very great man indeed. And one knew, which side that fell on.
Tariq Ali is not the only one Malcolm confides in.
He was sitting there very relaxed with loose trousers and a white T-shirt. He wasn't in a suit or anything. And his chair was right near the window overlooking a then courtyard. And he turned his back on us and he said, "I'm like a hare in a cornfield. They're getting closer and closer to me, and they're going to get me one day." I think retrospectively that we were strangers that he expected he would never see again.
2 months later, in February 1965, Malcolm returns to Britain, paying a visit to Smethwick near Birmingham, to see for himself a notorious case of British racial discrimination.
Marshall Street, this row of terrace cottages, then due east for 250 yards. It's here that the whites have banded together and look as though they'll persuade the Conservative-controlled council to halt the coloured invasion, to save Marshall Street, they say, from becoming a black ghetto.
The campaign is led by a local resident who persuades Smethwick Council to buy up vacant properties on Marshall Street and rent them exclusively to white people.
During the last 2 years, Marshall Street has completely fallen apart. We've watched it happen. And this delegation to the council was purely to try and make a stand to stop the road completely being taken over by coloured people.
Malcolm X gave a press conference outside this pub, the Ivy Bush, after walking around this area, accompanied by Asian, and colored people who lived in this region to show him the areas where the racists had been strong. And the reason for it was very straightforward. In the 1964 election campaign, this seat, which used to be a safe Labour seat, went Conservative because the Conservative candidate, Peter Griffiths, campaigned under the slogan of, "If you want a coloured neighbour, vote Labour," which shocked all the political parties, including the Tories, because this open racism had not yet been witnessed within the political establishment.
I do believe that once the hysteria of the last few weeks has gone, we shall see that Smethwick was a beacon of hope at this last election.
With the beacon consigned to history, Tariq Ali is in Smethwick to meet the man who persuaded Malcolm to make the journey, Avtar Singh Jewel.
Hi, Avtar.
Hi, Tariq. Malcolm very kindly agreed to visit Smethwick, and the situation he saw Smethwick, he gave the statement, it is worse than
the United States.
United States.
Because in the United States, there were laws now that you couldn't segregate, etc. Whereas here they weren't at that time.
When we met on Marshall Street, 15 of us were there. Journalists, BBC, ITV people, and he didn't talk to the press. He talked to us. Then he expressed that he wanted to walk on Marshall Street. And we said we will accompany him. But he said no, he wanted to walk alone. He kept very calm. He didn't look back at those who were shouting slogan. He walked all the length of the Marshall Street, and he stopped at a house where there was a sign, house for sale, no colored apply for. And then he spoke to the press. He said, this is worse than America. I was over the moon to read his statement in the papers. Solidarity with each other was important, and Malcolm very kindly expressed that when he came to Smethwick.
It isn't only Smethwick's Asian residents who are inspired by Malcolm's solidarity. There's a strong West Indian community here too.
Hi there, Binny. Good to see you.
Greetings, Tariq. Long time.
Very nice to see you. And Smethwick was made the center of racism by the Tory MP Peter Griffiths.
That's right.
And the appalling things that he said.
Yeah. Racism is so widespread and institutionalizing, especially in this society and other societies in Europe and America. So my impression is that it just tells me that we have to fight a bit harder to smash racism.
Yeah.
Malcolm X's historic visit to Smethwick is marked today by this plaque on one of the houses on Marshall Street, where he was more than half a century ago.
Is this the local council or?
No, this is not the local country. As you see there, it's African Caribbean Self-Help Organization and the Indian workers. With this plaque where it's showing people when they walk past their children also, the Asian and African children, they say, Malcolm came here.
9 days after walking Marshall Street, Malcolm X is dead. Assassinated by Nation of Islam gunmen in New York at the age of 39.
The day he was assassinated, I remember very vividly, a girlfriend woke me up and on the front page it said Malcolm X assassinated. Yeah, I remember I started crying immediately. That was my first reaction, no, and then tears. And that whole day we spent really mourning him, you know, talking about him, mourning him, drinking most of the day, and, you know, shattered.
In the months following the murder of Malcolm X, Tariq Ali becomes famous for his uncompromising stand against racism and what he sees as American imperialism. In particular, his criticism of America's involvement in Vietnam helps him become president of the Oxford Union. the first Pakistani to do so. But it comes at a personal cost.
The president, Tariq Ali. Most of the letters are against him, but also many are for him. This is something of a cross-section.
Congratulations. I hope your debate will be a pruning hook in the dead wood of many minds. Nobody asked you to come here, so go away and leave our queen alone. Racial act or no racial act, we'll hound some of you blacks back to your mud huts or your wealthy parents. Ali, go home.
In my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, brown, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change.
The words Malcolm spoke to the students of Oxford University in December 1964 become part of his epitaph, his legacy. A legacy that continues to this day, inspiring people who weren't even born until long after Malcolm died to become involved in the fight against racism.
My name is Loki. I'm a British Iraqi. I was born in 1986 London. I'm a hip-hop artist and political campaigner and student of history.
I'm Ty. I was born in 1972 to Nigerian parents that came over here from the Biafra War. I'm a hip-hop artist, musician, producer.
Just in your own words, what did he mean to you and how did you discover him?
For me, Malcolm X, I discovered him in my teenage years, and I didn't discover him via school. And the effect that he had on me was that was one of the first unapologetic, fierce, intellectual black men that spoke to the world in a way that I needed to see as a young man. I didn't need to see this kind of, oh, let's all hold hands. I needed to see someone say, if you're going to kill us, be prepared for something to come back to you because it's unacceptable.
We need an organization that no one downtown loves. We need one that's ready and willing to take action. Any kind of action. Not when the man downtown sees fit, but when we see fit. By any means necessary.
From a young age, we understood that Martin Luther King was a sanctified version of what black rebel resistance was, when really Malcolm X was way closer to what I needed to hear in regards to understand how to fight the struggles that we have to endure living in the UK or being a black person in Europe or in the world in general.
Loki, how did you first discover Malcolm?
So I first discovered Malcolm X by reading his autobiography. For me, what I learnt from Malcolm X was his clarity, his passion and his conviction in the face of inevitable repression. From my own experience, growing up in the shadow of the Gulf War and then the war in 2003 as an Iraqi in Britain, as Sinan Antoun puts it, kind of barbarian in Rome, as it was during the War on Terror, I saw at best my situation in this society was one of being tolerated, quote unquote, and at worst possibly being an enemy combatant. And what I saw in Malcolm X was something that I could relate to and kind of take solace in his life story, in his experience, in the way that he dealt with it.
Malcolm, had he lived, would have been in his 90s. Of course, he knew he would never live that long. He knew. But let's assume that he was witnessing all that we have been witnessing. Where do you think he would have been today?
The world wouldn't be the same. We wouldn't be living in the same world if he'd have stayed alive.
What always sticks out to me is his dichotomy of the wolf and the fox.
What do you feel the Negroes could do in respect to obtaining even more effective protection from our federal government?
You never will get protection from the federal government. That's like asking the fox to protect you from the wolf.
He had a clarity about power, and he was never sycophantic towards it.
I think Loki will agree, most of us are growing up with this little microchip in us, which is do not offend white people. Do not intimidate or do not call racism up too much. You know, just get by. Even my parents kind of, just don't say this, don't say that. And I think Malcolm's legacy is that he taught us that, you know what, all of that is nonsense. It's wrong, it's not right, we need to call it out. And if we need to show strength and actually just wipe everything off the table and start again, then we need to do that.
I think that he is really essential reading for teenagers in this time, trying to understand this mythology of biology, which is race.
When a black man strikes back, he's an extremist. He's supposed to sit passively and have no feelings, be nonviolent, and love his enemy. No matter what kind of attack, be it verbal or otherwise, he's supposed to take it. But if he stands up and in any way tries to defend himself, then he's an extremist.
I was lucky that I met him at a time when he himself describes his own mental condition as that of being someone in a process of learning, of transition. What Malcolm said still holds true, in my opinion. Think for yourselves, fight back, and fight for the oppressed of the world on all the three continents. That was his message, a message of internationalism. And I think that's why he was killed. He was a dangerous figure now.